I have brokered 341 settlements in my life. War endings, hostage releases, succession disputes, the ugly bloody knots that two peoples tie themselves into when they cannot bear to keep fighting and cannot bear to stop. I have sat across the table from creatures who had murdered children, and I have found the price that would make them stop, because there is always a price. That is the first thing they teach you and the last thing you stop believing. Everything can be negotiated. Everyone in the end deals. I built my whole life on that, my whole self. My whole species built itself on that across 10,000 years. And then I sat across a table from a human in the worst crisis of my career. And the human said 4 words that took the floor out from under everything I am. We will not negotiate. I am called Resh. I am of the Ceph, and to understand why those 4 words terrified me, terrified the whole council, terrified a galaxy that had heard every threat there is, you have to understand what my people are, because we are not like the others. The Ceph are brokers, not by trade, by blood, by the deep architecture of what we are. 10,000 years ago, my ancestors were small and weak on a world full of larger, fiercer things. And we survived the only way the small and weak ever survive, which was by becoming necessary to everyone, by being the ones who could stand between 2 enemies and find the thing both of them wanted more than they wanted each other dead. We made ourselves into the hinge the whole world turned on. And over 10,000 years that became our biology, our instinct, our way of seeing. A Ceph looks at any 2 parties in conflict and feels the way you feel hunger, the shape of the deal that lies between them. We cannot help it. We see the price of everything. It is how we are built. So when the council needed someone to manage the crisis at Threshold Station, they sent me because I was the best they had, and because the crisis was the kind that only a Ceph could resolve, a hostage crisis, the oldest and ugliest kind of negotiation there is, and the one my people are most perfectly built for. Let me set it for you, because the setting is the thing the recordings never capture, and I was there in the room, breathing the air. Threshold Station was a civilian hub on the council's outer edge, a great slow-turning wheel in the dark, home to 100,000 souls of a dozen species, a place of markets and dockyards and families, the kind of ordinary place that exists in the background of every civilization and never makes the histories until something terrible happens to it. And something terrible was happening to it. A faction, I will call them the Coral Ascendant, a splinter movement of one of the Council's own member species, radicals who believed the Council had grown soft and corrupt and needed to be shocked back into strength. The Coral Ascendant had seized the station's central ring. 3,000 of them, armed, disciplined, fanatical, and in seizing it they had taken hostages. 12,000 civilians, trapped in the central ring, held against the Council's compliance with a list of demands. And of those 12,000 hostages, a little over 400 were human. I need you to understand how routine this was at first. I want to be honest about that, because the horror of what came later only lands if you understand how completely ordinary the beginning was. A hostage crisis is a negotiation. It is the purest negotiation there is, in fact, stripped of all the diplomatic decoration, down to the raw bone of the thing. One party has something the other party wants, the lives of the hostages, and will trade it for something they want more. The Coral had the lives. The Council wanted them. And between those 2 wants lay a deal, the way a deal always lies between 2 wants, and my job, the job I had done 341 times, was to find it, to feel out the price, to discover what the Coral wanted more than they wanted to keep killing, and to arrange for the Council to give them enough of it that the killing stopped and the hostages walked free. This is the part everyone gets wrong about hostage negotiation, so let me tell you the truth of it. You do not win by force. You do not win by refusing the hostage takers. You win by understanding that the hostage takers, however monstrous, are rational, that they took the hostages for a reason, that the reason points to a want, and that the want is the door. Every hostage taker in history has wanted something more than they wanted the hostages dead, or they would have simply killed them and not bothered with the taking. The taking is the proof that a deal exists. You take hostages because you intend to trade them. And so the negotiator's whole art is to find the trade, to make it acceptable enough to both sides that everyone walks away with something. Because a hostage-taker who gets nothing has no reason not to kill, and a hostage-taker who gets something has every reason to release. It is a brutal arithmetic, but it is arithmetic, and my people are very, very good at arithmetic. The Coral made their demands. Standard demands, the demands of radicals everywhere, the release of their imprisoned leaders, a withdrawal of council forces from certain worlds, a sum of resources, a platform to broadcast their grievances to the reach. I read the demands and I felt, the way a Ceph always feels, the shape of the deal inside them. Some of the demands were real, the things the Coral actually wanted. Some were inflated, the opening position, the things they would trade away to get the real things. My whole art was to tell which was which, and to find the settlement, and I could already feel it forming, the way you feel a word on the tip of your tongue. There was a deal here. There is always a deal. I had done this 341 times. And then the humans answered. And everything I knew stopped being true. You have to understand the structure of the thing. The hostages were of many species, and each species' government had a voice in how the council handled the crisis, because these were their citizens, their families, and no government will sit silent while a faction holds its people hostage. So the council convened the affected governments, mine among them as broker, to coordinate a unified response. The Vorth government wanted their citizens back at any cost. The Threnar government wanted assurances. The Lissi government wept and pleaded and offered to pay whatever ransom was needed. Every government did what every government does in a hostage crisis, which is to participate in the negotiation, to add its want to the great arithmetic, to push for the deal that would bring its people home. This was normal. This was the machine working as it was built to work. 12,000 hostages, a dozen governments, one broker, and a settlement waiting to be found in the space between everyone's wants. The human government sent a single representative to the coordination. A woman named Adami Castellanos, an envoy, calm, unremarkable, who sat quietly through the whole frantic session, while the other governments bargained and pleaded and calculated. And when the council asked each government to state its position, its bottom line, the thing it needed from the settlement to bring its people home, the human envoy stated humanity's position, and the room went silent, and the silence was the beginning of the terror. She said, "We will not negotiate." At first, I want to be honest, at first I did not even understand it as a position. I thought she had misspoken or that the translation had failed because the words made no sense inside the machine I was running. We will not negotiate. In a hostage crisis, with 400 of your own people held at gunpoint. It was not a bottom line. It was the absence of a bottom line, the refusal to even enter the arithmetic. The other governments looked at her with confusion and then with something like horror because they understood before I did what it might mean. The Lissi envoy actually cried out, "But your people, your families, they're in there, you have to." And the human envoy looked at her, not unkindly, and said it again, the same 4 words, the same calm. "We will not negotiate." And the Coral heard it. That is the part that matters. The coordination was not secret. The Coral had eyes and ears. They were monitoring the council's response, because that is what hostage-takers do. They watch to see how badly you want your people back, because how badly you want them is the whole of their leverage. And so the Coral heard humanity's answer alongside everyone else, and I watched, in real time, on the monitors from inside the seized ring. I watched the Coral commander react to it, and his reaction is the thing I have spent the rest of my life trying to understand. He laughed. The Coral commander laughed, because he thought, as I first thought, that the humans had made a catastrophic blunder. To a hostage-taker, "We will not negotiate" sounds like the best possible news. It sounds like a party that has taken itself out of the bidding, that will not push for its hostages, that has abandoned its own people, which means those people are now worthless as leverage against the humans and can be spent freely, used as the first examples, killed to show the other governments that the quarrel are serious. A government that will not negotiate for its hostages has, in the brutal arithmetic of the crisis, simply thrown those hostages away. The Coral commander laughed because he believed humanity had handed him 400 free executions, 400 bodies he could use to terrify the governments that would negotiate. I did not laugh. I want that on the record. I did not laugh because I am a Ceph, because I feel the shape of every deal, and as I sat in that room I began to feel something I had never felt in 341 negotiations, which was the absence of a deal where a deal should be. The humans had not abandoned their people. I could feel that. A government that abandons its hostages feels a particular way to a broker. There is a calculation in it, a cold weighing, the resources saved against the lives lost, and you can sense the arithmetic even when it is monstrous. The human envoy had no such arithmetic. She was not weighing her hostages against a price and finding the price too high. She had stepped outside the weighing entirely. And a party that has stepped outside the weighing is a party I cannot read, cannot broker, cannot find the deal inside, because there is no deal inside a refusal to deal. And I had built my entire self on the certainty that there is always a deal inside. I requested a private channel to the human envoy. The council granted it. And I asked her, broker to government, the most basic question of my trade. I asked her what humanity actually wanted. Because everyone wants something, and the want is the door. And if I could find the want, I could find the deal, even a strange deal, even a deal that did not look like a deal. I asked her, what is it you're trying to achieve? What outcome are you negotiating toward, even by refusing to negotiate? And she looked at me through the channel, and she gave me the answer that ended my old life and began my new one. The answer that is the reason I am telling you this. The answer that terrified not just me but eventually the whole council, when they finally understood it the way I came to understand it. She said, you think we will not negotiate means we don't care about our people. It means the opposite. It means we care about them too much to make them worth taking. She paused, and I felt through the channel the total absence of the arithmetic I was straining to find. Here's the thing your whole galaxy has never figured out, broker. Hostage-taking works because it works, because every government negotiates, because everyone pays. You've taught every faction in the Reach that the way to get what you want is to grab innocent people and name a price, and the price always gets paid, because no government can bear to let its citizens die. You've made hostage-taking the most reliable business in the galaxy, and we're not going to be customers anymore. She leaned closer to the channel. We will not negotiate. Not this time, not next time, not ever. Not because we don't love our people, because we've done the longer arithmetic, the one you're too good at the short version to ever see. If we pay this time, we buy 400 lives, and we sell every human in the galaxy forever to every faction that learns the price of a human is whatever they ask. We're not paying that. We will never pay that, and once everyone knows, we'll never pay it. She stopped. She let me finish it myself because she could see I was a Ceph, that I felt the shapes of things, and she wanted me to feel this one arrive. I finished it. I felt it arrive, and it was the coldest thing I have ever felt, and it is the thing the title means, the thing that terrified the council, the thing that took 10,000 years of my people's certainty and broke it across one human sentence. Once everyone knows humanity will never pay, humanity stops being worth taking. The hostages become worthless not because humanity abandoned them, but because humanity removed the incentive to ever take them in the first place. The Coral commander, laughing on his monitor, believing he had won 400 free executions, had in fact taken 400 of the only hostages in the galaxy that were guaranteed to buy him nothing. Not a discount. Nothing. He was holding the one currency that humanity had made permanently, structurally, eternally worthless. And he did not know it yet. And when he found out, when the whole galaxy found out what it meant that one species had simply stepped out of the arithmetic forever, it was not the humans who would be terrified. It was everyone who had ever made their living on the price of a life, including me. I sat in that room, the best broker the council had, the hinge a galaxy turned on, and I felt for the first time in my life the floor of my whole existence give way. Because if there could be a party that would not deal, that had removed itself from the arithmetic on purpose, forever, then the arithmetic was not the law of the universe I had always believed it was. It was just a habit everyone had agreed to, and the humans had just announced, calmly in the middle of a hostage crisis, that they were done agreeing to it. The Coral Commander was still laughing. He thought the easy part was about to begin. He had no idea that humanity had just done the most dangerous thing one party can do to another in any negotiation, more dangerous than any threat, any weapon, any army. They had taken away his leverage by refusing to value the thing he was holding. And a hostage taker holding hostages no one will trade for is not a man with power. He is a man standing in a room full of people he now has no reason to keep alive and no way to profit from killing. A man who has, without realizing it, become the most trapped person in the entire crisis. The humans had not freed their hostages. Not yet. But they had done something stranger, and the council would soon learn, far more terrifying. They had changed what the hostages were. And in changing what the hostages were, they had changed what the hostage taker was and what the crisis was, and what the whole 10,000-year game was. And not one of us, not the Coral, not the council, not even me, the broker who felt it coming first, yet understood how completely the ground had moved. I am going to tell you what happened inside Threshold Station when the Coral Commander stopped laughing. But first I have to tell you about the longer arithmetic, the one the human envoy said I was too good at the short version to see, because understanding it is the only way to understand why we will not negotiate, was not an abandonment of 400 human lives, but the fiercest possible defense of every human life that would ever exist. And that took me, a Ceph, a creature built to feel the price of everything, the rest of the crisis to learn. Let me tell you about the coordination room in the hours after the human envoy spoke, because that is where I first watched the 4 words begin to do their work. Not on the Coral, not yet, but on the other governments, on the council itself, on the whole careful machine of the crisis. Because a thing happened in that room that I had never seen in 341 negotiations, and it frightened me almost as much as the human position itself. The other governments turned on humanity, hard, immediately, and I understood why, and the understanding is the thing I want you to sit with, because it reveals the trap the whole galaxy was caught in without knowing it. The Lissi envoy, the one who had cried out, accused the humans of murdering their own people. The Vorth representative, a hard military caste not given to emotion, called humanity's position reckless, irresponsible, a betrayal of every government in the room. And the reason they were so furious, the reason they could not contain it, was that humanity's refusal threatened them. Not the Coral, them. The negotiating governments. Because the whole arithmetic of a hostage crisis depends on everyone playing, on every government wanting its people back badly enough to pay. And the moment one government refuses to pay, it does not just affect its own hostages. It changes the price of everyone's. Here is the thing I felt, sitting in that room, the thing my broker's senses laid bare. The Coral had taken 12,000 hostages and named one set of demands for all of them. The negotiation was a single pool, and in a single pool, the value of the hostages is set by the government that will pay the most, because the Coral will hold out for the highest bidder, will use the most desperate government to set the price the others must match. The Lissi, weeping, offering to pay anything, were not just trying to save their own people. They were, without meaning to, setting the price of every hostage in the station, including the humans, including everyone. The most desperate government in a hostage crisis drags everyone into its desperation, because the hostage taker prices to the desperate. And humanity, by refusing to pay anything at all, was doing the opposite. They were pulling the price down, not just for themselves, for everyone. A government that will pay anything raises the price of all hostages everywhere. A government that will pay nothing, ever, lowers it. And the other governments hated humanity for it in that moment, because humanity was refusing to participate in the bidding war that the other governments needed everyone to participate in, so that the shared desperation would feel normal, justified, the only possible response. Humanity standing there saying we will not pay was a mirror held up to every government that would pay, and what the mirror showed them was that their love for their people, their willingness to pay anything, was the very thing that had made their people worth taking. That hurt. That is a thing no one wants to see. It is far easier to call the humans monsters for refusing to pay than to face the possibility that your own willingness to pay is what keeps the hostage takers in business. I tried to say this in the coordination room. I was the broker. It was my place to explain the shape of things. I said, the human position, however terrible it feels, lowers the price of hostages across the reach. If every government refused as humanity refuses, hostage-taking would end because it would stop paying. The reason it never ends is that someone always pays, and the someone always pays is what we are all defending when we condemn the humans. They did not want to hear it. Of course they did not. Because the logic followed all the way down, indicted every one of them, and indicted the council itself, and indicted 10,000 years of my own people's work. Because we, the Ceph, the brokers, were the ones who had made the paying smooth and reliable and survivable. We had built the machine that always found the deal. And in building it, in being so very good at finding the price that ended each crisis, we had taught the whole galaxy that there was always a price. And a galaxy that knows there is always a price is a galaxy where taking hostages always pays, where the next faction always tries it, where the crises never stop because the solution to each one guarantees the next. We had been solving hostage crises for 10,000 years. And the human envoy had just shown me, in 4 words, that our solutions were the disease. I went back to the private channel. I had to. I could not let it go the way you cannot leave a wound alone. I asked her, and I was no longer asking as a broker working the crisis. I was asking as a creature whose whole foundation had cracked. I asked her how humanity had decided this, because it could not be easy. 400 of their people were in that ring. The refusal was not abstract to them. It had faces, families, names. How does a government look at 400 of its own citizens held at gunpoint and say we will not pay and mean it? And the human envoy was quiet for a moment, and then she told me a thing I did not expect, a thing that changed her in my eyes from a cold calculator into something far harder to dismiss. She said, "It's not easy. I want you to understand that because everyone in that room thinks we're cold. We're not cold. It's the worst thing we've ever asked of ourselves. There are people in my government who can't sleep, who think we're wrong, who will carry those 400 faces forever if this goes badly. We argued about it for years before we ever made it policy, long before this crisis, before this station, before anyone took a single human hostage." She paused. "That's the part your galaxy doesn't get. We didn't decide this today in the heat of it looking at these 400. We decided it cold, years ago, in a quiet room, when no one's life was on the line, because that's the only time you can make a decision like this honestly. If you wait until your people are in the room with the guns, you'll always pay, every time, because in that moment 400 lives in front of you will always outweigh 4 million lives you can't see yet. The only way to ever protect the 4 million is to decide before in the cold, and then hold the line when the heat comes. We're holding the line. It's costing us everything it was always going to cost. And we're holding it anyway because we decided, when we could still think clearly, that we would." I sat with that. The broker in me, the Ceph, turned it over and over. Because it was the answer to the thing that had most confused me, how a party could step outside the arithmetic. And the answer was that they had stepped outside it in advance in the cold, before the crisis, and bound themselves to the cold decision so that the heat could not move them. They had done to themselves what a wise creature does who knows it will be tempted. They had made the decision when they were strong, and removed their own ability to remake it when they were weak. The refusal was not coldness. It was the opposite. It was a love so large it could only be expressed as a rule made in advance, a rule that hurt its makers more than anyone, a rule that said we love our people too much to let our love for the ones in front of us doom all the ones we cannot see. That is the longer arithmetic. That is what she meant when she said I was too good at the short version to see it. My whole art was the short version, the deal in the room, the price that ends this crisis, the settlement between these wants. And I was so good at the short version that I had never once in 341 negotiations asked what each settlement taught, what each paid ransom purchased beyond the hostages. I had ended 341 crises, and in ending each one I had confirmed to the whole watching galaxy the lesson that taking pays, and so I had, with my own celebrated skill, helped cause some unknowable number of the crises that came after. The human envoy had not done a better negotiation than me. She had refused to negotiate at all, and in the refusing she had seen the thing my skill had blinded me to. That the game itself was the problem, and that the only winning move was the one no broker could ever make, which was to stop playing. Back inside Threshold Station, the Coral Commander had stopped laughing. I watched it happen on the monitors, and I will tell you about it properly in its place, but I want you to have the first moment of it now, because it is where the terror that the title promises actually began. The commander had laughed because he thought humanity had thrown away 400 hostages. And then his own people, his lieutenants, the ones who watched the same feeds, who heard the same 4 words, began to do the arithmetic he had been too pleased to do. And one of them, I would learn later, said to him the thing that drained the laughter out of the seized ring like air out of a breached hull. One of them said, "Commander, if they will not pay for these 400, then what are we holding them for? And if we kill them to make the others pay, the humans still will not pay, not now, not ever, and now we have murdered 400 people for nothing, and made an enemy of the one species in the galaxy that has just announced it does not respond to leverage. What do we do with hostages that buy us nothing alive and cost us everything dead?" That is the trap humanity had built, and it was a perfect trap, and the most terrible thing about it was that humanity had not built it for the Coral. They had built it years ago, in a cold, quiet room, for everyone forever, and the Coral had simply walked into it by taking the wrong 400 people. The commander stood in his seized ring holding 12,000 hostages, 400 of whom had just become radioactive, worthless as leverage, lethal as liability, a portion of his prize that he could neither use nor discard nor profit from in any way, and he began slowly to understand that the humans had not made a blunder at all. They had made him the blunder. By taking human hostages, he had reached into the one part of the galaxy that had removed itself from his entire way of being powerful, and now he was holding a fistful of nothing that would still, somehow, be the thing that destroyed him. I am going to tell you how it destroyed him and what the humans did next, and what the Council did when it finally understood, really understood all the way down, what one species stepping out of the arithmetic meant for 10,000 years of how the galaxy had worked. But you have the foundation now, the 4 words, the longer arithmetic, the cold decision made in advance and held against the heat. And a broker, the best the Council had, sitting in a coordination room with the floor of his whole existence cracked open, beginning to understand that everything he had ever been good at had been, all along, a kind of harm, and that a species he had been sent to manage had just taught him, in 4 words, the one thing his 10,000-year people had never learned. That some things must not have a price, and that the refusal to price them is not weakness, and is not coldness, and is not even, in the end, really about the 400 in the room. It is about every life that comes after, and it is the fiercest love there is. The crisis changed shape in the 3rd day, And the changing is the part I most need you to understand, because it is where the title's word, terrifies, stops being about a feeling and becomes about a structure. The council was terrified, not of the coral. The coral were a known quantity, a problem the machine knew how to solve. The council was terrified of the humans, of what humanity's forewords were doing to the machine itself. And I, the broker sent to manage the crisis, found that I was no longer managing the crisis at all. I was watching, helplessly, fascinated, horrified, as the crisis managed itself into a shape no negotiation had ever taken, because the central assumption every negotiation rests on had been removed by one government's refusal to play. Let me tell you what was happening inside the seized ring, because by the third day we had good intelligence from inside, and the intelligence was the strangest thing I have ever read. The coral were fracturing, not over strategy, over the humans. Because the commander's lieutenant had asked the question that could not be unasked. What do we do with hostages that buy us nothing alive and cost us everything dead? And the coral had no answer, because their entire operation, their entire theory of power, rested on the certainty that hostages are leverage and leverage is universal. They had built their whole gamble on the galaxy's 10,000-year lesson that everyone pays. And now, holding 400 people who would never be paid for, they discovered that their theory had a hole in it, a hole the size of one species, and through that hole the certainty of their whole enterprise was draining away. Because here is the thing that the humans understood, and the coral were only now learning. Leverage is not a property of the hostage. It is a property of the relationship. A hostage is only leverage if someone will trade for them. The coral had always believed leverage lived in the gun, in the grip, in the holding, that to hold a life was to hold power. But to hold a life is only to hold power if the life is wanted by someone who will pay. And humanity, by refusing to pay, had revealed the thing that 10,000 years of always paying had hidden, that the hostage-taker's power was never his own. It was lent to him, every time, by the willingness of the other side to deal. The coral had thought they were powerful because they held the guns. They were only ever powerful because everyone they had ever threatened had been willing to negotiate. And the moment they threatened someone who was not, the power simply was not there, had never been there, was revealed to have been, all along, a gift from their victims that their victims could withdraw. The human hostages inside the ring understood this before the coral did. That is the part that still moves me, because the 400 humans in that ring knew their own government's policy. They knew when they were taken that no one would pay for them. They had known it before they ever set foot on Threshold Station, because it was their own policy, made by their own government in their own name. And so the humans in the ring did not behave like hostages. They behaved like people who had already, long ago, made peace with the cold arithmetic that protected every human who would ever live, including, now, possibly at the cost of their own lives. And a hostage who has made peace with their own death is not a hostage anymore. They are something the hostage-taker has no tools for, because every tool a hostage-taker owns is built for a person who wants to live badly enough to be leverage. The intelligence from inside described it, and I read it again and again. The human hostages were calm, not brave in the loud way, not defiant, calm. They organized the other hostages, the frightened Lissy and the weeping families of a dozen species, and they kept them calm, and they tended the wounded, and they did the small, ordinary human things that the recordings from inside that ring show them doing, and through all of it, they treated the coral not as captors with power over them, but as people who had made a terrible mistake, and did not yet understand how terrible. One human, I have her name, it is in the records, she was a teacher named Akafer traveling with a school group, and the school group is part of why this crisis became the one the whole galaxy watched. One human said to a coral guard, in a moment the guard later reported because it broke something in him, she said, "You should let us all go. Not because we'll pay you, we won't, you know we won't. Because we're the only thing keeping the others alive. As long as you're holding us, you're holding the proof that none of this works, and the longer you hold that proof, the more it costs you. We're not your leverage, we're your mirror, and nobody can stand to look in a mirror that long. The guard let his hostages go. Not all of them, he could not, he was one guard, but his ones. He opened his section of the ring and let his hostages walk, and then he walked with them, defected, because the human teacher had shown him the thing the humans showed everyone eventually, which was that he was not powerful and had never been powerful, that the power had been lent to him by a galaxy that paid, and that he was now holding a gun in a room full of people who had stopped lending it to him. And a gun that no one fears is just a weight in your hand and a thing you will answer for later. This is how it spread, not through force. The council never stormed the ring. That was the plan, the old plan, the military option that every hostage crisis ends in if the negotiation fails, and the council was preparing it, fleets and breaching teams and the whole grim apparatus of a violent resolution. But the violent resolution never happened, because the crisis dissolved from the inside before the council could resolve it from the outside, and it dissolved because of the 4 words, because of what the 4 words did to everyone who heard them and could not stop thinking about them. The choral commander tried to stop the dissolution the only way he knew, the way the old arithmetic demanded. He decided to make an example. He decided to kill hostages, to prove that the holding still meant something, that the guns still had power, that the galaxy's lesson still held. And he chose, in his fury, to kill the humans first, because the humans were the source of the rot, the mirror he could not stand to look in, the 400 who had made his whole enterprise meaningless. He would kill the humans, and in killing them he would prove that we will not negotiate had a cost, that the cold arithmetic had a body count, that humanity's policy was not clever but monstrous, paid for in human blood. And here is the thing the humans had foreseen, the deepest part of the longer arithmetic, the part that makes me shake even now to set it down. They had foreseen this too. Of course they had. They had decided their policy in the cold, years before, in a quiet room, and in that room they had not flinched from the worst case. They had known, when they made the policy, that someday a faction would take human hostages and would not be paid and would kill them precisely to punish the policy, to make it cost human lives, to break humanity's will. They had known that. And they had made the policy anyway and held it anyway, because they had done the arithmetic all the way to the bottom, to the place most governments cannot bear to look, and at the bottom they had found this. If we pay, we save these 400, and we doom an unknowable number to come forever. If we refuse, and they kill these 400 to punish us, then every faction in the galaxy watches us bury 400 of our own and still not pay. And in that burial, in that unbearable refusal even over our own dead, the lesson becomes permanent, becomes unbreakable, becomes the most credible commitment any species has ever made. Because a government that will not pay even when its people are being murdered to force the payment is a government that has proven, in blood, that there is genuinely no price. And there is nothing more terrifying to a galaxy of hostage-takers than a victim who has proven, with their own dead, that taking their people accomplishes nothing but the taker's own ruin. The humans had decided to be willing to bury their dead unransomed, so that no human would ever be worth taking again. It was the most terrible commitment I have ever encountered, and it was, when I finally understood it all the way down, the most loving, because every grave it was willing to dig was dug in defense of every human grave it would thereby prevent. They were willing to lose the 400 to save the 4 million. And they had decided it cold, in advance, and bound themselves to it. And now the heat had come, and they were holding the line, and it was about to cost them exactly what they had always known it might. The choral commander gave the order to kill the human hostages. I was in the coordination room. The human envoy was there. I watched her face when the intelligence came through that the order had been given, and I will tell you what I saw, because it is the thing that finally taught me what these people were. I did not see coldness. I saw a grief so total that it had gone past expression into a kind of stillness, the stillness of a creature holding a weight that would crush anything that moved under it. She had known this might come. She had helped make the policy that made it possible. And now 400 of her people, a teacher, a school group, families, were about to die for that policy, and she could stop it with a single word, could pay, could trade, could save them. And she did not say the word, and the not saying was costing her something I do not have the senses to measure. And she held it. She held the line in a grief that should have killed her, because she had decided in the cold that she would. And then the order was not carried out. Because the coral, given the order to kill the human hostages, refused. Not out of mercy, though mercy was in it by then, the mirror having done its work on guard after guard. They refused because they had finally, fully understood the trap, and they understood that killing the humans was the one move that would complete it. As long as the humans were alive, the coral were merely failing. The moment they killed them, the coral would have murdered 400 people to prove a point that the murder itself would disprove, because the humans still would not pay. And now the coral would be the faction that slaughtered a school group of children and a teacher, and 400 souls in exchange for nothing, for less than nothing, for the eternal enmity of the one species that had proven it could not be coerced, and the eternal contempt of a galaxy watching it all on the feeds. To kill the humans was to lose absolutely. To not kill them was to lose slowly. And a fracturing, desperate, cornered movement, given the order to commit the atrocity that would seal its own damnation, looked at the 400 calm humans who had told them, again and again, "You are not holding leverage, you are holding a mirror," and could not do it. The commander gave the order. His own people did not obey. And a hostage-taker whose own people will not obey his order to kill is not a hostage-taker anymore. He is just a man in a room full of people who have stopped being afraid of him, holding a gun that no one fears, having finally understood that the humans took his power away on the first day with 4 words before he ever stopped laughing. The seized ring opened. Not in one grand moment, in a slow dissolution, section by section, guard by guard, as the coral who could no longer bear the mirror walked their hostages out and walked out behind them, until the commander stood nearly alone in a ring emptying around him. His great gamble collapsed, not stormed, not defeated, simply dissolved by a thing he had no weapon against, the refusal of one species to value what he held. 12,000 hostages walked out of Threshold Station. The 400 humans among them walked out last, because they had stayed to help the others, because that is what they had been doing the whole time, and the teacher, HFY, walked out with her school group intact, every child, and the recording of that. 400 humans who had been told no one would pay for them, walking out alive precisely because no one would pay for them. That recording went across the whole reach, and it is the reason the title says the galaxy was terrified, because the galaxy understood. Watching it, what it had just seen. It had seen the end of the 10,000-year game. It had seen proof that the game could be refused. And it had seen that the refusal did not doom the hostages. It saved them, saved all of them, dissolved the crisis more completely than any ransom ever had, because a ransom ends a crisis and teaches the next one, while a refusal, held to the bitter edge of the grave, ends the crisis and teaches that there will be no next one, not against these people, not ever. I am going to tell you in part 3 what the council did when it understood this, and what my own people, the Ceph, the brokers, the hinge a galaxy turned on, did when we understood that our entire 10,000-year purpose had just been revealed as the thing that fed the fire we were paid to put out. And I am going to tell you what I did, Resh, the best broker the council had, when the human envoy turned to me at the end of the crisis and said the thing that ended my old life for good. Because the terror in the title is real, and it spread through the whole galaxy, but terror is only the first thing the truth does to you. There is a thing that comes after the terror if you are brave enough to stay in the room with it. The humans knew that too. They had been living in the thing that comes after for their whole history, and at the end of the crisis, the envoy offered to teach it to me. The terror did not end when the hostages walked free. That is the thing the recordings get wrong, the triumphant edits that end on the teacher and her school group walking out into the light. For the people who had walked out, yes, it ended. They went home, they grieved what they had nearly lost, they got on with the business of being alive. But for the council, for my people, for me, the terror was only beginning because the crisis at Threshold Station had been a small thing. One station, one faction, 12,000 lives, and the 4 words that resolved it were not small at all. The 4 words were a key, and the key fit a lock that held shut the whole 10,000-year structure of the galaxy. And once it had been turned, in front of everyone, on the feeds, it could not be unturned. Every faction in the Reach had watched humanity refuse to negotiate and win. And every government in the Reach had watched it too, and understood with a slow rising dread that the question they now faced was the one the human envoy had been quietly putting to all of us from the first day. If humanity can step out of the arithmetic, why can't you? And if you can, why don't you? The council convened in emergency session. I was called to it, as the broker who had been closest to the thing, the one who had felt it move first. And I want to describe that session for you, because it is where I watched the most powerful body in the galaxy come face to face with the fact that its power had been built on something it could no longer afford to believe in. The council's power, you see, ran on the same arithmetic the hostage-takers ran on. The council kept its peace the way it kept everything, through deals, through the management of wants, through the 10,000-year machine of finding the price that my people had built and maintained. The council had never ended a conflict. It had settled every conflict, which is a different thing, which leaves the conflict alive inside the settlement, sleeping, waiting. And the council had been able to do this comfortably for 10,000 years, because everyone believed in the arithmetic, because every party to every dispute came to the table believing that there was a price, that a deal existed, that the thing to do with a conflict was to settle it. The whole edifice rested on universal faith in the deal. And humanity had just demonstrated to the entire galaxy that the faith was optional, that a party could simply decline to believe in the price. And a structure that rests on universal faith does not survive the public revelation that the faith is optional, because the revelation spreads, party by party, dispute by dispute, until the council is trying to settle conflicts between parties who have learned that they do not have to settle, that they can refuse, that refusal can win. This was the terror, not that humanity was strong. Humanity was not particularly strong, that was almost the worst of it. The terror was that humanity had revealed the load-bearing illusion of the entire galactic order, and you cannot unreveal a thing like that. And the council sat in its emergency session, understanding that the world it governed had ended at Threshold Station, and a different world had begun, one in which the old machine of always find the deal no longer ran, because the parties had seen, all of them, that the deal was a choice and not a law. And then the Ceph were called to answer for it, my people, because we had built the machine. We were the brokers, the hinge, the ones who had made the always paying smooth and reliable for 10,000 years. And so when the council looked for who had made the galaxy so vulnerable to humanity's revelation, the answer was us. We had taught the galaxy there was always a price. We had been so good at finding it every time that we had made the price feel like a law of nature instead of a habit. And a habit revealed is a habit broken. And we had spent 10,000 years strengthening the very habit that one species had just shattered with 4 words. I was asked to speak for my people. I Resh, the best broker the council had. And I stood in that session in front of the powers of the galaxy, and I did the thing that ended my old life, the thing I had been moving toward since the human envoy first said we will not negotiate and took the floor out from under me. I did not defend my people. I told the truth instead. I said, the humans did not break the galaxy. They showed us it was already broken. We have spent 10,000 years calling the management of conflict the same thing as the ending of it, and it is not the same thing, and the difference is the difference between a wound dressed and a wound healed. Every settlement my people ever brokered left the conflict alive. Every ransom we ever found a price for taught the next faction that taking pays. We were not the cure for the galaxy's violence. We were its maintenance. We kept it running, smoothly, survivably forever, and we called the forever peace. The humans looked at the forever and refused it. They said, some things must not have a price, and we will prove it, even at the cost of our own, because a thing that has a price will be bought and sold until the end of time, and the only way to take a thing off the market is to make it, credibly, permanently, not for sale. They took their own people off the market, and it terrified us because we are the market. We are the species that prices things. And they have just shown the galaxy that the things that matter most are precisely the things that must never be priced, which means that we, the pricers, the brokers, the hinge the galaxy turned on, have spent 10,000 years being very, very good at exactly the wrong thing. There was no answer to that. The session ended without an answer, because there was no answer, because the thing I had said was true, and a true thing has no rebuttal, only consequences. And the consequences came over the years that followed, and they were not what the council feared and not what my people feared. The galaxy did not collapse into the chaos of universal refusal. That had been the terror, that if everyone learned they could refuse, no one would ever deal again, and the whole structure would dissolve into a billion parties all refusing to settle anything. It did not happen. And the reason it did not happen is the thing the humans understood that we did not, the thing the envoy offered to teach me at the end, the thing I have spent the rest of my life learning and now spend it teaching. The humans did not refuse to negotiate about everything. That was never what we will not negotiate meant, and the galaxy's terror had been built on misunderstanding it. The humans negotiated constantly. They were, the envoy told me, among the most relentless deal-makers their own world had ever produced, a species that had haggled and bargained and compromised its way through 10,000 years of its own history. They negotiated about almost everything. What they would not negotiate about was the one category of thing that must not have a price, because pricing it destroys it, the lives of their people used as leverage. They had drawn a single bright line, not around everything, around the one thing, and they had defended that one line absolutely, and left everything else open to the deal. And that, the envoy taught me, was the whole secret, the thing that made the difference between a galaxy that dissolves into chaos and a galaxy that finally grows up. You do not refuse to negotiate. You refuse to negotiate about the things that must not be for sale, and you decide in advance in the cold what those things are. A short list, a sacred list, the things you will lose everything before you sell, and then you negotiate freely and generously about everything else, because everything else can have a price, should have a price, is made better by having a price. The error of my people was not that we found prices. Finding prices is good. The market in ordinary things is how peace is actually built. The error was that we found a price for everything, that we let nothing be sacred, that we taught the galaxy that all things were for sale. And a galaxy in which all things are for sale is a galaxy in which the worst things are for sale, in which lives are leverage and children are currency, and there is no floor beneath the bargaining, no bedrock of things not for sale on which a real peace could ever be built. The humans had a floor. That was the whole of it. They had a small list of things that were not for sale at any price, defended absolutely, and on top of that floor they built the most flexible, generous, relentless culture of dealing the envoy said she had ever known. The floor did not make them rigid. The floor made the flexibility possible, because you can bargain freely and openly and without fear when there is a bedrock of sacred things beneath you that you know you will never be asked to sell. It is the absence of the floor that makes negotiation terrifying. When everything is for sale, every negotiation is a threat, because anything can be taken from you for the right price. The floor is what makes the dealing safe. The humans had taught the galaxy not to stop negotiating, but to finally build the floor that should have been there all along. The envoy, Adami Castellanos, came to me at the end of the crisis, before all the years of consequence, and she said the thing that changed my life. She said, "You're a broker." The best they had, I could tell from the first day watching you feel for the deal that wasn't there. You felt its absence faster than anyone. That means you're the one who can understand this. Your people aren't wrong to find prices. The galaxy needs people who find prices. It's how anything gets built. You're just missing the other half. You find the price of everything and you've never once asked what shouldn't have one. Come learn the other half. Come learn where the floor goes. Your whole species could be the thing that teaches this galaxy how to deal without devouring itself. But only if you learn first the short sacred list of things you'll never deal away. You're the perfect people to teach it. You just have to learn it yourselves first, the hard way, the way we did. In the cold. Before the crisis, while you can still think clearly about what you'd die before you'd sell. I went. Of course I went. There was nothing left of my old self to keep me. The floor of it had cracked on the first day and finished falling in that emergency session. And what was left was a broker who had finally understood the one thing his 10,000-year people had never learned. I went and I learned the other half, the hard half, the half about the floor, and I came back. And I have spent the rest of my life teaching it to my own people, to the Ceph, the brokers, the pricers, the hinge the galaxy turns on. Teaching them that our gift was never wrong, only incomplete. That a species that can feel the price of everything is exactly the species that most needs to learn what must never be priced. That the floor and the market are not enemies but partners, and that a galaxy needs both. Needs the brokers who find the prices and the bright bedrock lines that no price can cross. And that we, who had only ever been half of it, could become the whole of it, if we were brave enough to learn from a species we had been sent to manage. The galaxy did not end at Threshold Station. It grew up. Slowly over years, painfully, the way growing up always happens, but it grew. The factions learned that human hostages were worthless, and then they learned, watching other peoples adopt the human floor, that more and more hostages were worthless, until taking hostages stopped paying across the reach, and the oldest, ugliest business in the galaxy quietly went bankrupt, not because anyone defeated it, but because everyone, finally, stopped being its customers. And the brokers, my people, found that there was more work than ever for us, better work, the work of building real peace on real floors instead of the endless maintenance of conflicts that could never heal. We stopped being the people who found the price of everything. We became the people who helped each species find its floor and then negotiate freely above it. It is the best work I have ever done. It is the only work I have ever done that did not, somewhere underneath, feed the fire it was meant to fight. I am old now. I have brokered many settlements since Threshold Station, and they are different settlements than the 341 I brokered before, because they are built on floors and the floors hold. And when the young Ceph come to me to learn the trade, to learn how to feel the price of everything the way our people have for 10,000 years, I teach them that, because it is a real gift and the galaxy needs it. And then I teach them the other half, the half a human taught me, the half I would never have learned if a species I had been sent to manage had not said 4 words that took the floor out from under everything I was. We will not negotiate. I tell the young ones that those 4 words terrified the whole galaxy, and that the galaxy was right to be terrified, because the 4 words ended a world. And then I tell them the thing the terror hid, the thing it took me the rest of my life to understand, the thing that is the true ending of this story and the only wisdom I have to leave. We will not negotiate was never a refusal to deal. It was the discovery of the one thing worth more than any deal. The humans did not terrify the galaxy by being unwilling to bargain. They terrified it by proving that a people who will bargain over anything have nothing, and that the moment you find the one thing you will not sell, you have, for the first time, something real to stand on, and from that one small bedrock of the sacred, a whole civilization of honest dealing can finally rise. They had 400 people in a room with guns. They would not pay. And in not paying, they saved not 400 lives but every life that comes after. And they taught a galaxy of pricers, at last, the one price we had never learned to name, which is the price of having no price at all. It is the highest price there is. The humans had been paying it their whole history, quietly, in a cold room, before any crisis, deciding what they would die before they would sell. And now, because of 4 words at a station on the galaxy's edge, so do we.